This is a demonstration for how to put shapes in the background of your prospective name project. You're going to start by using the vanishing point that you used for your letters, and you're going to create a set of 2 converging guidelines. They can go anywhere on your page as long as they are coming from the vanishing point. Within those guidelines, you're going to make various types of shapes. The first one I'm going to show you is a square or rectangle. So what I do is I'm making horizontal lines. I could also make diagonal lines, by the way, but I'm making horizontal lines. And the further that I get from the vanishing point, the further away I make each line. So that one should be a little bit further, so that the distance from here to here is shorter than the distance from here to this line. Now what I want to do is erase every other line so that I end up with floating boxes that converge to my vanishing point.
Adriana, I got a Mickey Pluto figurine.
I'm also erasing anything that's inside of my letter. I could have just drawn behind the letters, but it can be a little bit more confusing that way. So if you press very light and you draw right through your letters, you can then erase afterwards. Okay, so here I have a rectangle there, and here is another rectangle that are coming from the vanishing point. All right, for my next set, I start the same way. I make a pair of converging guidelines. And for this one, I'm going to be making circles inside. So for each circle, I want the top and the bottom to touch the guidelines. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having the guidelines. And as I get closer and closer to the edge of my paper, my circles become larger. This one I'm making as if it was going off the page. I don't try to squeeze anything on there. And then I just erase my guidelines. And I have my circles floating in space. The next shape I'm going to make is a little bit more complex. I'm going to show you how to make a triangle. So I will start off the same way that I did before with a set of converging guidelines, and I can make them go under my letters, but to make it easier for you to see, I'm going to make these go off to the side of the paper. And then I need a third guideline. So I can measure with my ruler distance between here and here, or I can just eyeball it and connect that point to the vanishing point. So I was basically finding the halfway point to create my third guideline here. And now, using a ruler, or you can start freehand like I'm doing, I'm going to make triangles, and the point will touch that third line. If I want to be fancy with it, I can make my triangles flip the opposite direction. And go back and forth. I can also make hearts using a set of 3 guidelines. With a heart, I would make one side touch one guideline, one side touch the other, and the point on the top and the bottom of the heart, those 2 points, will both rest on that middle guideline. So again, this point rests on the guideline, this point rests on the guideline. I wouldn't recommend switching off between triangles and hearts like I did. I'm just doing this to show you basically how you do this, but I would stick to one or the other. All right. Now you'll notice I used horizontal lines for my rectangles here. I want to show you what it would look like if my guidelines were going a different direction. I'm just going to go right through my letters. Okay, here if I made the horizontal lines, that would work, but I also have the option of making vertical lines here. And I'm going to do so, like this. And now, same as before, erasing every other guideline. One final thing I'm going to show you is a bit more complex, and that's how to make shapes that overlap each other. So I'm going to make my shapes overlap this set of shapes I made here. In order to do that, at least one of my set of guidelines must overlap the shapes. I could make both overlap, or I could just make one, which is what I'm going to do. So one guideline's overlapping, and the other I'm making above. Again, instead of putting this line here, I could have made the guideline overlap, and then my shapes would be completely overlapping or going under these shapes here. So I have these guidelines, and I can make any kinds of shapes I like in here. I could do more circles, I could do rectangles, I could do triangles if I put a third guideline, though I recommend if you're doing this and it seems complicated, I recommend keeping it simple. And I'm ignoring the other shapes. I'm acting as if they're not there. Okay, and already you can see it looks a little bit confusing, but it's going to be more clear once I begin to erase. So I'm erasing every other rectangle, just like before. And I'm going to start in the middle this time. I want to keep this rectangle, so I'm going to erase the top line and bottom line here. So the top and the bottom I'm erasing for that part of the rectangle. And I kept this one, so I'm erasing the top and the bottom here. Same thing here. And I'm going to just leave that there. Okay, so as you can see, it looks like these two are overlapping each other and are transparent. I want them to look opaque. I want it to look like they're not see-through. So I have to decide which one's on top, which one's on the bottom. If I want this one in front of here, then I'm going to erase whatever's inside of it. If I wanted this one to be in front, say I change my mind, I can simply draw that line back. This is what I would erase. And obviously, because I did that freehand without a ruler, I should go back over it with a ruler. Okay, so this one's on top, that one's below. I can do the same here, or I can have it flip-flop. I can make the one on the bottom overlap the top shape. And one last one over here. Okay, and obviously also for my triangles and hearts, I would want to erase all of those guidelines before doing anything with a Sharpie or before adding any colors.